That's cool, good on you for coming.
Where are we up to?
Second egg.
Williams in the debate society, isn't it?
Yeah, just do what you can. Right?
Yeah, I was just about to say.
She's got that
Yeah.
Hana, I don't know your woman.
Oh, there's two of them, so you're unlikely to guess either.
Elizabeth.
No,
Mary.
no,
Jane.
no.
Okay, I got 25 minutes till we have to leave.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think Hana's like a common name.
Like to
So
call
Hana,
to
like,
the second
we
figure
use-
of the negative. Hana. Something.
We might have to use something.
Hana, something, Nyhof.
We're not.
I might have to leave earlier.
Hana, Captain Fantastic.
I'll take that.
You might want to move.
Captain if you're a girl, Captain.
Oh, didn't shot.
Yeah. Yeah, so you can look like paying attention. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we on the negative team are still alarmed by the fact that the only real analysis, sort of in terms of like what a video game is and how it really works and how it holds attention we have from the affirmative team, is oh well you just run around and shoot people and that's exactly like real life. So of course people are going to translate that violence to real life, right? And the thing is that at first on the negative team we explain to you why there is a really big gap between what people do in video games and what people perceive real life to be, and why that violence simply does not carry over. And so that's going to be my first point for you today, is going to be responding to that and looking at these ideas of, you know, we're just rewarding shooting and just really show you why the violence that we see in society does in no way accrue from video games. And my second and my substantive point that I was put at first is going to be sort of around this idea of the increased harm of people just sitting in their rooms all the time, playing away at their violent video games, and sort of at the cost of other better social behaviours. And I'm going to show you, first of all, why being in your room and playing a video game actually doesn't exclude you from society nearly as much as the affirmative team would like to point out. And then I'd like to show you, furthermore, why that's not an issue with violent video games so much as that is an issue with potentially video games as a whole and compared to parental controls. And so why the problem that the affirmative team want to point out and why it's just violent video games being a threat to society simply doesn't exist. So first of all, ladies and gentlemen, we heard from the affirmative team that real life is getting scarier, that there's an increase of violence among young people and the cause is violent video games. And we've said, well, actually no, ladies and gentlemen, that young people are able to sufficiently distinguish between the aliens they're killing in video games and the people they meet on the street. Ladies and gentlemen, when the affirmative team stands up and says violent video games are bad because they teach you that in certain situations it's okay, like when the narrative matches the one in your video game, it's okay to shoot and kill people. We say when the narrative matches aliens invading Earth, like it does in Gears of War 2, which is like the biggest selling violent video game ever, or when the narrative matches Halo, when aliens are again invading Earth, which is the second biggest selling video game, maybe in that case it wouldn't be such a bad thing to shoot the aliens, but ladies and gentlemen, that simply does not transfer to real life. We say that furthermore, even if you look at games that are aimed at being slightly more realistic, like games, for example, Modern Warfare, where you're in World War II, we say that people still aren't going to come out of a game, or out of a session of playing a game, and feel like they're in Modern Warfare 2. And that they're actually in World War II and it's actually now appropriate to shoot people. We say that you can see that this is further disconnected when you say that things like, in most violent video games, people have things like guns, people have things like tanks which they can run people over with. We say that it simply doesn't exist in real life. That there's no way that you can get into a pattern of shooting people in your video game that you will then come out and replicate in real life. And we say that furthermore, if you look at examples of video games like The Sims, which are designed to replicate real life incredibly closely, like the idea is that you've made real people, we say that we still in those instances don't have people thinking that The Sims is real life. We don't think that we can now walk around and just change everybody's clothes when we look at them, or that everyone lives in houses with lots of tiny rooms that you might fall into and starve to death. We say that, ladies and gentlemen, there simply isn't that link. And so then in terms of the idea of it gives a sort of pervading idea that society is inherently more violent than it is, and so you kind of got your defences up and you're ready to do violence onto other people more readily. We say that, ladies and gentlemen, by creating a completely alternative world that gamers realise is a completely alternative world and portraying that as, yes, violent, you then make the world safer by contrast. You then come out of your video game and say, oh, no one out here has a gun pointed at me, no one out here has tentacles, ladies and gentlemen. We say that there's not really a link there. If people aren't associating video games with real life, they're not then going to think real life is more violent. That link is based on, or that point is based on the same link, and it's a link that simply doesn't exist. And so then they tried to justify this by saying, well, the narrative in stories is really addictive, and it's violent narratives that's all about shooting that makes people want to go out and do violence onto others. And we've told you, ladies and gentlemen, that in violent video games, the narrative of the story revolves around characters like Don trying to find his wife who the aliens have kidnapped. We say that that's the driving focus of the story, that there's strategy in the story to save hostages, to do the right things. And yes, a large part of achieving that focus or achieving that strategy is shooting people up, is doing violence, and you do get points when you shoot people, but the overall focus is not let's go in and count the bodies, it's let's go in and try and achieve a goal. So we say that the narrative isn't about like let's shoot as many people as we possibly can. It's about let's achieve these goals, and in this fantasy world in which we're trying to achieve these goals, we're allowed to achieve them by using our giant chainsaw guns to carve up people. We say that, ladies and gentlemen, there's none of this link that the affirmative team is trying to tell you between video games and real life, and we say that that's a link that children and young adults realise, ladies and gentlemen. And we say that in terms then of the idea that this is going to be particularly violent video games, are particularly bad for high-risk kids. We say that, ladies and gentlemen, while it's bad that maybe they're getting their hands on material that has been rated above their age, we say that to imply that they're inherently dumber and won't be able to tell that the aliens in their video games aren't real is offensive, ladies and gentlemen, and simply doesn't stand up. We say that there's no reason to suspect that a child whose parent doesn't watch them closely is more likely to believe that the people on the street are suddenly from World War II and need to be shot than any other child, ladies and gentlemen. We say that that simply doesn't stand up. So we see that these video games aren't causing an increase in violence. We see that when you look at examples of where violence is occurring in society with young adults, we say that you see that being like young girls are increasingly violent and they're not the target audience and they're not the ones playing these games on the majority. So we say that given that that doesn't stand up, the only point then that the affirmative team have is this idea that people are antisocial and it's bad if they therefore just go into a room and play a game where they shoot lots of people. And we've told you, first of all, ladies and gentlemen, and we'll scoff at it, but it's true, that it's not as antisocial as I've tried to make it out to be playing video games. We've told you, first of all, that given that 90% of people under the age of 25 engage in gaming, we say that, first of all, simply on the level of I now have things in common with the people around me, it gives you a shared hobby, which brings you into a community that you wouldn't otherwise be a part of. We say, specifically, if you're talking about people who generally feel marginalised and now have a shared hobby that they can talk about and that they can make friends over, we say that that's a good thing. But we say further to that, in terms of the actual playing of games, Will clearly, obviously has cooler hobbies, but doesn't understand that most violent video games, in terms of things like Halo, or again Modern Warfare, all have this thing called online playing. And that actually people who end up spending a lot of time playing are playing online with other people, competing against them or working with them. So we say that there's actually a good deal of interaction going on between people as they play. And we say that furthermore than that, ladies and gentlemen, so that there's not actually this huge problem of video games, especially violent ones, being that antisocial. And we say that further to that, the problems with antisocial behaviour come more around how much time you choose to spend sort of with your whole head in your room, and that's not a link between violent video games and antisocial behaviour, that's a link between antisocial behaviour and not spending time in society. So ladies and gentlemen, we say that there's no violence increase and there's no sort of antisocial issues. So the motion.